Today, we have our monthly anthology of news stories about the Disney company. And in the past few days, there has been some good news for fans of the American parks. We'll also take a look at the biggest challenges that Disney faces moving forward. Along with this, we'll explore what was revealed on last week's quarterly earnings call. Typically, our monthly news episode posts on the first Sunday of the month, but this month, there was simply too much news to arrange it all into a single show. Last week, we broke down the nuances of Disney's ongoing legal battle for the Reedy Creek Special District in Florida. We looked at the two lawsuits and explored how elements in them shaped the battle moving forward. This is probably the single most important ongoing story that concerns the parks in the past year. Even this week, in an SEC filing, Disney explained that the issues related to Reedy Creek, and here I'll quote, collectively could negatively impact and may have already impacted our ability to execute our business strategy, our costs, and the profitability of our operations in Florida. If you are interested in the latest elements in that story, how legal maneuvers might shape the future of the Disney resort in Florida, just go back one episode. There's a 45-minute episode that breaks down the most recent developments in that story. But today, we're going to focus on other things. Problems with Disney's streaming service, good news for those hoping to visit the Florida resort, and what really happened when Murphy the Fantasmic Dragon caught fire at Disneyland. But before we get there, I have a number of new Bandcamp subscribers that I would like to thank. We're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast, so these are the people who keep this whole enterprise going. Today, gratitude is going out to the Full Purse Smith, Alexander 826, Dizfreak 13, Craig, Jarango, Julie, Herbie the Love Bug 53, Philip, Ash Tree LaFay, Aaron, Athena, and Lad Auger Jeff. Thanks to each of you for supporting this show. So, if you've got your cruise control set, if you've laced up your shoes and are ready for your walk, if you're at home in your favorite chair with your headphones on, here we go. Let's start here with the second quarter earnings call. These are typically conference calls in which the company arranges the most recent financial report in a way that creates the strongest positive image. But with the question and answer session and with some of the financials themselves, the problems still come through. The parks are doing well right now, even though the company acknowledges that moving forward, particularly in Florida, they expect lower levels of visitation. Right now, the most troubling area in the company remains Disney Plus, whose quarterly overview at best sent mixed signals to investors. Late last year, Disney Plus raised its subscription price and also initiated a domestic version with advertising, which brought in additional revenue. These two things right here raised the domestic average revenue per user, also known as ARPU, from $5.95 per subscriber up to $7.14 per subscriber. In terms of news, this was on the upside for Disney Plus. There was a lot more on the downside. The streaming service lost money, and a lot of it, about $200 million for the quarter, but it was a lower loss than in recent quarters and was in line with analysts' projections. Analysts also expected Disney Plus to gain about 2 million subscribers, bringing the service from 161 million up to 163 million subscribers. But the service actually lost subscribers. Over the second quarter, which is January 1st through April 1st, Disney Plus lost 4 million subscribers. With these losses, total subscribers fell to 157 million. Disney Plus gained a few new subscribers, but those gains were far outweighed by losses. In North America, Disney lost about 300,000 subscribers, partially due to an increase in the subscription rate, but the Indian and South Asian version of the service, Disney Plus Hotstar, shed 4.6 million subscribers as Disney lost the rights to televise cricket matches with the Indian Premier League. At multiple points in the earnings call, Iger explained that he was still remaking the identity of Disney Plus by undoing some of the poor decisions approved by Chapek. Chapek, of course, wasn't mentioned by name, but his presence and ideas hovered on the call like a ghost. Iger explained that previously, meaning under Chapek, the service had been focused on a wide range of show categories and topics, but now, meaning under Iger, Disney Plus was now focused on those shows that increased the total number of subscribers and reduced churn. Iger mentioned that tentpole movies drove subscriptions, such as Pixar films. Beyond that, he didn't indicate areas that increased subscriptions, but I would guess that these would include Star Wars series such as The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan, and Marvel series, such as Hawkeye and She-Hulk. Likely on this list were also animated films such as Encanto and programming for younger viewers. Some programming that doesn't seem to be moving the subscription needle much are low-budget live-action adaptation of animated classics such as Pinocchio, Lady and the Tramp, and Peter Pan and Wendy. Also shows that mimic HGTV and Food Network type offerings, such as Foodtastic, Be Our Chef, and Renovations. These shows may fill out the just added column on the Disney Plus home screen, but likely aren't the reason people subscribe. Iger said that Disney would be getting much more surgical about what we make for the service. He also explained that Disney Plus would pull some content that presently exists there. In terms of costs, this likely accomplishes two immediate goals. It allows Disney to take a tax write-down on the show, and it also means they no longer pay residuals to the people who worked on it. Beyond this, it allows Disney then to license that content to another service. There's some high-value content that doesn't seem an ideal match for the Disney Plus audience that Disney might be able to monetize through licensing to other services. For example, and this is just an educated guess, that 3-part series on the Beatles, Get Back, directed by Peter Jackson, might find a better audience match on another streaming service. The plan here seems fairly straightforward. There will be less new content on Disney Plus, but the content presently being greenlit will drive subscriptions and keep people from canceling. Put simply, there will be far fewer shows like Renovations, and there will be a greater emphasis on shows like Obi-Wan. Investors were clearly upset with the numbers. Disney stock started that day at $103 per share. By the closing bell, it was at $101. After that 4:30 earnings call, though, in after-hours trading, the stock was down to $96. By the following morning, it was down to $92, a one-day change of over 10%. Disney Plus remains one of the largest challenges for Bob Iger. Since he returned to the company, its stock price has remained in a narrow trading channel between $90 and $110, and presently the stock is at the bottom of that channel. Iger simply hasn't been able to yet turn the streamer around and elevate the stock price. The streaming service is far more central now to Disney's distribution model than before the pandemic. During the pandemic, on this podcast, we discussed how fewer movies were likely to reach theaters in 2023 and following, with more releases being tentpole films, Oscar hopefuls, and children's offerings, with a lot of mid-range fare instead going directly to the consumer. That has very much played out. 2023 is a relatively COVID-free year. Theaters are open, studios are engaged with theatrical releases, but in terms of box office receipts, from January 1st to May 10th, the overall box office is down 24.6% compared to that same period in 2019, which was the last pre-COVID year, and it's down 32.3% compared to the same period in 2018. And this is why the streaming service is so important in this moment to the future of the company. It is the distribution arm that will pick up a significant amount of the entertainment bandwidth once carried by traditional theaters. Iger likely knows that in addition to picking a strong successor, shoring up the streaming service remains one of his largest jobs moving forward, one area that investors are presently eyeing with care. Let's now click over to some good news. One of the most requested vacation options will finally return to the Florida resort at the start of next year. Specifically, the Disney Dining Plan comes back starting January 9th, 2024. This is after the winter holidays and a couple days after the 2024 Disney World Marathon weekend. In other words, it's the exact moment when the Florida resort moves into one of its slowest periods of the year. So if there are problems during the rollout for the revised dining program, they can be managed during a period of low visitation. And I'm sure you noticed the word revised in that description. This is not the same dining plan that went away in March 2020 at the start of the pandemic. There are changes, and there are reasons behind those changes. Almost surely, the reason the dining plan is coming back is that Disney is seeing some soft reservations in the months ahead. This was even highlighted on the earnings call last week that the company lowered expected revenue in the third quarter from Disney World and Disneyland. But beyond that, as we've repeatedly talked about on this podcast, now that Tron is open in Florida and Runaway Railway is open in California, neither resort has an e-ticket attraction being developed. There is a re-theme of Splash Mountain, but that attraction won't be ready for a while. In Florida, the resort is hopeful that that attraction will open winter 2024, but from internal rumblings, I'm hearing that date may be a little unlikely. And in California, the current version of Splash Mountain hasn't even closed yet, which means 2025 at a minimum. Simply, the Florida resort needs to activate offerings that will bring in more guests and also keep them on property. This strategy is not only apparent in the revised dining plan, but with policy changes to day tickets, annual passes, and the park reservation system. We'll talk about all that more in just a moment. But along with a need to bring more guests to the Florida resort after many months of post-pandemic recovery, the restaurant ecosystem at Disney World is finally at a point where it can support additional diners, even if this version of the dining plan has more of an emphasis on quick service restaurants. Nearly all of the Disney World restaurants are finally open. A number of character meals have finally returned, which are the key to the dining plan program, and recently, more restaurants have expanded back into breakfast. Labor shortages and supply issues, which plagued the resort in 2021 and 2022, have improved over the past year. There are still some problem areas in the restaurant ecosystem, but these are mostly confined to signature and fine dining options. Some signature restaurants are still only open on select days, and with limited availability, signature restaurants fill most of their tables even without the dining plan. I'll also add in this. From watching restaurants over the past year, it feels as though the resort had enough capacity so that some version of the dining plan could have returned a few months ago, but as long as guests were booking rooms and buying tickets, the dining plan was unnecessary to activate tourism. In fact, Disney no doubt made more money selling food at menu prices to guests than through the dining plan. Now, with a decline in reservations, the resort is pivoting to a revised dining plan to increase the number of traditional tourists who visit the resort. Before the pandemic, there were 3 long-time dining plan tiers: the Disney Quick Service Plan, the Standard Disney Dining Plan, and the Deluxe Disney Dining Plan. Less than 2 weeks before the resort shut down for the pandemic, Disney introduced a 4th option, the Disney Dining Plan Plus, but let's ignore that for now because hardly anyone was familiar with it. 2 of the 3 long-time options are returning, and you'll immediately notice that these options favor counter-service restaurants that don't require advanced dining reservations. Anyone booking a Disney World vacation package, which includes park tickets and a Disney hotel room or campground reservation, can also purchase a dining package. If you have an annual pass, you can add a dining package to any hotel or campground reservation. First, there is the Quick Service Plan. This includes 2 quick service meals for each night of your reservation, 1 snack per night, and 1 refillable mug, good for the length of your stay. A quick service meal includes an entree combination along with a drink. For those under 21, the drink can be soda all the way up to specialty milkshakes. For those over 21, the drink can be soda up to beer, wine, or a specialty cocktail. For me, one of the things that I love about the resort are its table service restaurants, which aren't included on this first plan. But this would be a reasonable plan for families who want to spend a lot of time in the parks. On Bandcamp, I've done multiple episodes on dining options in the parks and around the resort. But if I had to pick the best quick service option for each park and for Disney Springs, it would be these. In Animal Kingdom, Satuli Canteen. In Epcot, Regal Eagle Smokehouse, though Katsura Grill would be a close second. In Magic Kingdom, Columbia Harbor House. In Disney Springs, Polite Pig, which recently got a nod from the Michelin Guide. And over in Hollywood Studios, it's a tough call because of the limited options, but I think I'd go with Docking Bay 7. The second dining plan option is the Standard Dining Plan. This includes 1 quick service meal for each night of your reservations, 1 table service meal per night, 1 snack per night, and 1 refillable mug, good for the length of your stay. The table service credit includes a full buffet or a prefixed menu or an entree plus appetizer or dessert along with a drink. As before the pandemic, 2 table service credits can be combined for a signature or fine dining restaurant. Some of the best values for a single table service credit are character dining, which is on the upper end of non-signature options. The best character dining option by far, in my opinion, is Storybook Dining at Artist Point over at Wilderness Lodge. Presently, you can find character dining options still available about a month out from a visit, but once the dining plan returns, these will be difficult to find. You'll need to book early. The only major change to these plans compared to their pre-pandemic versions is the snack credit. Previously, guests received 2 snacks per day, many of which went unused or were used to buy snacks on the final day of a vacation to take home. Noticeably missing from this list is the deluxe dining option. The deluxe option offered 3 counter service or table service meal credits per day, which is a tremendous amount of food. For most visitors, this meant that they would have a single credit table service restaurant at lunch and a 2 credit meal at a signature restaurant for dinner. The deluxe dining option, if you used it right, was also the best value. For $120 per night, you received enough credits to easily redeem $200 worth of dining at some of the best restaurants on property. I doubt the problem here lies with the value of the deluxe package. For most tourists on the deluxe package, they typically left the resort with unused credits, thereby evening out the cost-benefit ratio. The problem here likely lies in the availability of restaurants, particularly at the signature level, which was the focus of that deluxe package. Those restaurants right now simply do not have enough capacity to expand out broadly into the dining plan. Pricing has not yet been announced for these plans, though just before the pandemic, the quick service plan was $55 per day for adults and $26 for kids. The standard plan was $78 per day for adults and $30 for kids. I'm expecting to see around a 15% increase in prices when they come back online, which would be just slightly higher than inflation. As these plans are meant to entice guests into booking vacation packages, I would be surprised if increases were substantially beyond that. But pricing, of course, will be the key to estimating how much of a value these plans offer guests as opposed to how much convenience they offer. You can book dining plans as part of a vacation package starting May 31st for reservations beginning January 9th, 2024. Pricing should be up in a week or two, so we will loop back to this next month to estimate how much value or savings is included in these revised dining plans. The dining plan is not the only change coming to the Florida parks. There are others, including some long-awaited changes to the park reservation system, changes that have been quietly discussed for months. Back in November, I thought there would likely be an announcement about these changes before the end of the year. Part of the delay, it seems, is related to the changeover in management from Chapek to Iger. As you already know, in the early months of the pandemic, Disney World initiated a park reservation system. Initially, this was to ensure that guests felt comfortable inside the park with plenty of distance between their traveling group and other people. But clearly, the long-range plan, both in Florida and California, was to use the reservation system to moderate crowds, simply to ensure that no park was ever a July 4th style crush of people, and to give managers more accurate information concerning crowd levels so they could adequately staff. Specifically, so managers would not overstaff, which can dramatically increase labor costs. As has been evident in recent months, in retrospect, some of this planning has been overkill. Back in January, Disney announced that single-day, date-specific tickets no longer needed a reservation, as they were already tied to a park on a specific date. Also, annual pass holders didn't need a reservation to visit any park after 2 p.m., except on Saturday and Sunday at the Magic Kingdom. To me, this indicated two important things. First, staffing levels in the parks were finally at the point where the resort was willing to engage more variable attendance. And second, planning teams at the resort were looking at months of soft attendance in the days moving forward. Rules on annual passes were being relaxed to encourage more frequent visitation and ideally more spending on food, merchandise, and other experiences, specifically because the Disney team knew that moving into the near future, there would be a noticeable dip in attendance. This suspicion was all but confirmed when in April, the resort put all levels of annual passes back on sale, which would significantly broaden out the annual pass holder base. There are a number of economic factors that will likely limit some travel later this year and into 2024. Rising interest rates, high gas prices, and the rising cost overall for travel. Compared to pre-pandemic levels in terms of national averages, car rentals are up 51%. Hotels 15%, food away from home 24%, and flights 10%. The one area here that is different for the Florida resort compared to national averages concerns food. Upper-end restaurants on property have seen very little increases in price compared to pre-pandemic levels. The ribeye at Le Cellier over in World Showcase has increased by just $2 from 2019 to 2023, where it is presently $59. That is under a 4% increase during a time when inflation is running about 14%. I believe this means Disney feels price levels are already at the upper end of what the public will accept at most signature restaurants. But quick service restaurants have seen far more substantial price increases. A cup of chowder from Columbia House is up nearly 50%, presently at $6.79, and the various bowl options at Satuli Canteen are up between 15 and 39%, where they range from $14.49 to $17.49. Depending on where you eat, Disney is either below the national average for price increases on menus or significantly above the average. Signature restaurants right now are in ways a bargain. The most important takeaway from this, however, is this. If you are a cost-conscious traveler drawn to quick service options, you'll see the highest percentage in food increases, even if actual increases are only a few dollars per item. Combined with other travel increases, this will work against traditional visitation from middle-class families with kids, especially in an environment with high interest rates. A growing financial reluctance to travel sets up the context for the continued change at the Florida resort. Disney simply wants to make it easier for people to visit. Starting on January 9th, 2024, other elements of the park reservation system are going away. Standard multi-day, date-specific tickets will no longer need a park reservation. This includes the vast majority of tickets sold for the resort. In ways, the previous system of park reservations was redundant here. The resort didn't know exactly where you'd be on each of these days, but the resort knew that you and your party would be in the parks. With a large enough sample group, industrial engineers could easily figure out how many people would be in each park by looking at historical averages. Along with this, on many dates, annual pass holders and cast members won't need reservations on what will be called good-to-go days. This group, though, has more erratic visitation habits, but we've talked about this before on the podcast. In terms of managing attendance, maybe there is value to having reservations for a Saturday in December, but there's little value to be had in requiring reservations for a Thursday in February. I'd expect to see most non-holiday weekdays listed as good-to-go days for cast members and annual pass holders. The busiest parks, which are Magic Kingdom and Hollywood Studios, will likely continue to see some reservation restrictions for cast members and annual pass holders, but the park with the largest capacity, which is Epcot, I'm guessing will be good to go for the vast majority of days year-round, except for some days during peak holiday periods. For many people, the park reservation system has been another layer of planning for a vacation that already feels rife with planning. Airline hotel, transportation reservations, advanced dining reservations, reservations for add-on activities, and then there's that whole Genie Plus thing, which is a type of in-park planning and reservation system, and more on that in a little bit. But in terms of park reservations, most of this will finally go away. It's been confusing for the casual guest. Also, it's been mostly unneeded for many cast members and annual pass holders, except on the weekends. From other travel metrics, Disney already has a strong idea as to how many traditional tourists will be in the parks on any given day, long before they arrive. As mentioned above, the most erratic group in terms of visitation patterns are annual pass holders and cast members, simply because for many of them, they can just jump in a car and drive over. Almost surely, at least for the foreseeable future, there will be reservations needed for some parks on some days for those groups, as typical metrics can't forecast their visitation patterns. If a storm was predicted for Saturday afternoon but shifts west to Tampa, leaving clear skies in Orlando with absolutely no reservation system, the resort could fill up quickly with locals overwhelming those parks, specifically Hollywood Studios and Magic Kingdom, those most susceptible to crowds. None of these changes, I should point out, are presently slotted for the California resort. Simply, California has too many locals, many of whom have annual passes. Disney World sits in Orange and Osceola counties. Any place in those two counties is an easy drive to the resort, less than an hour. Together, those two counties have 2 million residents. In California, Disneyland is an easy drive from anywhere in Orange County, Los Angeles County, Riverside County, and San Diego County. Together, those counties have 19 million residents. The locals who can make a spur-of-the-moment decision to drive to the parks in California ensure that the reservation system will last longer at Disneyland than at Disney World. But Florida visitors will be getting a lot more freedom in terms of how they visit the parks starting in 2024. Before I shift focus over to California, the last area I want to touch on briefly concerns Genie Plus in Florida. Along with the meal plan and park reservation system, Disney announced that it will also make changes to the Genie Plus service in the near future. Very few details were given about these changes, but here is the official statement. We have heard from guests that they would like ways to plan with Disney Genie Plus service and individual Lightning Lane selections before the day of their park visit, and we want you to know we are working on ways guests may do this for visits in 2024. Our goal is to give you the opportunity to spend less time planning in the park and more time enjoying your visit with friends and family. While we're not able yet to share specific details, we look forward to sharing more information at a later date. To break this down a little bit, Disney is aware of guests' dissatisfaction with the current Genie Plus system. At the moment, you need to be awake just before 7 a.m. to have access to the best attractions early in the day and to maximize the service. Most people on vacation want to sleep later than 7 a.m., and that's just the first problem. The second problem is that Genie Plus requires guests to continually engage the Disney app while in the park, thereby taking their focus away from family, friends, and the experience around them. I'm guessing that this might be more of an issue for middle-aged and older guests, less tied to their phones than it is for younger guests who are looking at their phones anyways. Lastly, there's the issue of cost timing, and I suspect this is a significant driver here for this change. While you are at the Disney parks, you are continually being asked to pay for various items and services, meals, snacks, parking, souvenirs, and so on. Genie Plus is another item that guests are asked to pay for during a period of high-density payments. It may be easier for guests and also for the resort to shift the payment timing for Genie Plus to an earlier period in vacation planning. Guests tend to complain about the cost of a Disney vacation based on what they actually pay for while at the resort. Rarely do they complain about the cost of airfare or a hotel room, which was purchased months earlier. The complaints are typically centered on restaurants, souvenirs, and other things, such as Genie Plus, they pay for while in the resort. Shifting the payment point of Genie Plus to, say, an earlier period where people buy their vacation package will simply bury the cost of Genie Plus inside of other vacation elements. Very few people will remember the $25 or $35 per person per day Genie Plus service they paid for back in January while they are in the parks in June. The cost for a Genie Plus, if aligned with prepayment and bundled with other items such as a hotel, is less likely to be a point of irritation for guests after their vacation. Second, as with the old Fast Pass Plus system, a Genie Plus service with pre-planning is another way to track guests and to minutely manage staffing needs in each park. Though there are no details as to how this new Genie Plus service will work, the suggestion is that guests could pre-plan some aspects of their trip with Genie Plus and paid Lightning lanes, essentially pre-booking reservation times from the comfort of their own homes to create at least a starting itinerary for each park. In terms of a staffing planning system, this will replace the robust data lost when the park reservation system mostly goes away. Even though traditional tourists typically won't have reservations for individual parks anymore, a revised Genie Plus system with an element of pre-planning will indicate where those same guests will likely start their day, and therefore provide data similar to what the retiring park reservation system previously provided. Again, not a whole lot is known here, but what we are seeing in many areas is a shift back to the pre-2020 policies for the parks, an arrangement that will make a visit to Disney World feel a whole lot more like it did before the pandemic. It's been a bumpy month for the American parks. Out in California, the final float for Disneyland's Magic Happens parade broke down at the hub. This was the float with its golden castle that carried the characters from Sleeping Beauty. It just stopped for about 10 minutes until the characters finally stepped off and walked the rest of the route, leaving the float behind to be moved later. They walked past the Matterhorn through Fantasyland and finally to the gates that led backstage by Small World. Out in Florida, the Liberty Bell got stuck on Rivers of America, not far from Big Thunder. The rafts from Tom Sawyer Island were used to carry guests back to Frontierland. But the biggest issue for the month happened at Disneyland when the dragon in Fantasmic, nicknamed Murphy, caught fire during the finale of the show on April 22nd. I'm guessing you've seen a video online? Here is what was supposed to happen during that segment. Toward the end of the show, while the stage is dark, the dragon rises up from a subterranean pit and then extends to its full height, which is 45 feet. When it's stored in the pit, it's compressed to roughly half that. Once standing, its ominous yellow eyes ember through the darkness until the show lights illuminate its body. While the crackle of Maleficent's voice radiates out of the sound system, the dragon opens its mouth and releases a line of fire. This is a fire projection effect, which lights the river ablaze. I believe that this is accomplished with isopar, a petroleum derivative that is atomized into a mist that is then ignited, with that flame projector system integrated inside the dragon's mouth. This is a very different flame effect than the one used for Fantasmic in Florida. From there, Mickey walks out onto the stage and stands directly on an elevated door, sometimes called the Mickey Lift, to battle the dragon. In Florida, he battles the dragon with a sword, but in California, he uses magic that sparks from his fingers. As he prepares to do battle, 2 lines of color spotlights, one by one, sweep down, then together sweep up. Then Mickey shoots sparks at the dragon, and in return, from the side of the dragon's mouth explodes a line of sparks, appearing as light green pyro arching out into the darkness. The dragon then opens its mouth to release one final line of fire directed high into the sky, then water screens come on. Mickey is lowered down from the stage, and the dragon begins to collapse into its subterranean pit, the neck and head reducing down into the body until the animatronic is again half its full size. But this is not what happened on the night of April 22nd. I've watched many videos over and over, listened to some engineers, and this is what I believe went wrong. The dragon appears as usual. After those ominous eyes appear, then the initial line of fire to set the river ablaze. Almost surely, by this point, something is already wrong. Perhaps an isopar mist remained in the dragon's head cavity. Perhaps the first flame was blown back by a light wind. Perhaps a valve didn't shut off. But the problem is almost surely there by this point as Mickey walks on stage. There are subtle signs even here that the dragon is on fire even before the show reaches the next pyro mark. Then those color spots begin to sweep down light by light. This is the theatrical lead up to the next pyro mark. Before the progression is complete, the dragon's head bursts into flames. My take: there was a fire inside the metal skull, likely for many seconds. You can see evidence of this barely in a couple videos. That fire has now expanded to the point where it reaches the outer skin and oxygen. This is seconds before Mickey reaches the show point where he shoots sparks at the dragon, seconds before the drama reaches the show point where the small pyro is sparked from the dragon itself. Comparisons of multiple videos suggest that one popular theory about the start of the blaze, that it was related to the second pyro mark, probably aren't correct. The show never reaches that pyro mark, and the fire appears to be there for many seconds before the lighting cue sets up this sequence. So if those green sparks from the second pyro mark didn't ignite the blaze, exactly what did? On this, I have more questions still than answers. It seems that throughout the performance, there is some internal leak, likely of hydraulic fluids. You can see it dripping out of the dragon's mouth when the dragon tilts its head down to look at Mickey. If you watch multiple videos, you can see small lines of smoke rise up out of the sides of the dragon's mouth a few seconds before the top of its head bursts into flames. This suggests that something was burning inside of the animatronic before the exterior skin that covers its skull and horns caught fire. For many seconds, most of the audience is unaware that there is something wrong, as the fire appears to be inside the animatronic's metal skull. This also brings up another question. When did the techs notice that something was wrong? The audience, of course, doesn't notice any of these early signs. It is a nighttime spectacular with an amazing animatronic and stunning special effects. But the techs surely know that something is wrong before the audience does. The show stops in two stages. First of all, the dragon and the pyro effects are turned off at some point during the lighting cue that leads up into the second pyro mark. The dragon does keep moving. I've watched this on many videos. The dragon is visibly on fire during the mark where the green pyro sparks typically appear. The dragon moves through this mark head ablaze with no additional pyro. The pyro at this point has been turned off. The dragon's head crosses the stage, then stutters, then moves into what I am guessing is a parked position. The animatronic is fully extended, directly vertical, head above its body. This may be a safety position. It will minimize the danger as it keeps the dragon and therefore the fire furthest from offstage areas, or it may simply be the position the animatronic assumes just before it collapses down into the pit, as that was an upcoming movement cue. Regardless, this is probably the best position for a 45-foot-tall animatronic on fire to assume, as it minimizes the footprint of the blaze. During the entire lead-in for this musical cue, the person playing Mickey is clearly unaware that part of the dragon a few seconds earlier has caught fire. Mickey moves his hands in time with the music, ready to send sparks from his fingers up to the dragon. Only then, with his hands outstretched, facing the dragon, does the person playing Mickey know that something is now wrong. This is likely relayed to the suit actor through a concealed headset. The costume only offers the actor playing Mickey a limited view of the stage, so once this person has that information, they crane their head back to see the top of the dragon, which is now on fire. Mickey stands like that for a few seconds. The dragon is now a small blaze. Also, at this point, Someone has given the person playing the mouse instructions to remain on the lift. Perhaps the show, along with its music, are running because the techs want to use the show lift to bring Mickey safely off stage. Lights and the lightning effects continue in the show, even as the dragon appears to be in a full upright locked position. Again, and this is a guess, a full E-stop of the entire show might have deprived Mickey of the safest exit, which was quickly riding that stage lift elevator down. Even if that wasn't the reason, parts of the show continued. Once the lift is being lowered with Mickey on it, the show moves into a full emergency stop. There is less than a minute between the first fully visible flames and a full E-stop and an announcement that the show is ending for the night. The pre-recorded audio says that the show is ending for unforeseen circumstances, which brings a laugh from the audience, as it's clear now the dragon is on fire. Still, for the techs, this is a reasonably quick response. Most online videos documenting this are filmed from the audience area. At this point, from this location, mist screens rise up to conceal the dragon. But there's a few videos taken from the side which reveals what happens after those water screens go up. For about 15 seconds, the dragon's head remains stationary. But then there's a very light spray, not much, a small spritzing of fluid, and the head, with 3-stepped movements, shifts to its right and resettles at a slightly lower position. Almost surely the small mist and the head resettling indicate that part of the hydraulic system has now burst. The dragon, with its formative steel armature, will almost surely remain in place. But this means there's another line, likely a high-pressure line, leaking or ready to leak hydraulic fluid from inside the animatronic. Hydraulic fluid is far less flammable than fuel. It has a high flash point. It becomes particularly flammable in a very hot fire, or if it comes from a high-pressure line that aerosolizes the fluid as it's released from the line. After the dragon's head settles to that lowered position, it's clear that some liquid is now dripping out of its mouth. This falls on the lower portions of the animatronic, setting that on fire as well. Then there is a small fireball, far smaller than in the actual show. My guess, as the show was stopped just before the second fire projection effect, there was probably some onboard fuel in the system ready to stream. But then comes the big problem. A high-pressure line burst from just beneath the dragon's jaw, sending a line of fluid directly onto the ground. This fluid does not catch fire, at least not for many seconds. This is likely a ruptured hydraulic line under high pressure. The dragon weighs 9 tons, though most of that weight is in the lower stationary structure. It would still take incredible pressure in those lines to lift and articulate the upper portions of the dragon. On the ground at this time is a man holding a fire extinguisher. This is almost surely not a standard cast member or stagehand. As the show uses fire effects, there are almost surely trained firefighters near the stage during the effects portion of the show, probably one on the right, one on the left. This person is not trying to extinguish the fire on the dragon itself. He is making sure the fire doesn't spread beyond the stage area where the dragon sits. In this, he was extremely successful. He remains on stage until a second small fireball flame explodes out of the dragon's head, again, probably fuel loaded into a line. Almost immediately then, he begins to back away. Also, right around at this point, the high-pressure line of hydraulic fluid has stopped spraying from the dragon's head down to the ground. By this point, the fire is far hotter around the dragon's head. When the line of fluid again sprays out from the top of the dragon's neck, it is immediately ignited, perhaps from the elevated heat, or perhaps because this second stream is partially arranged into a mist. Perhaps this fluid is even from a different line, because it shoots out at a slightly different trajectory. This causes notes of concern and awe to rise up from the audience. Most interpret this as a repeat of the fire projection effect that is in the show, but the fire here in this stream is far stronger, denser, and hotter than anything in the regular show. This line of fire does finally ignite the length of the figure. When that hydraulic line seems finally to be exhausted, the firefighter briefly ventures back onto the stage to dampen flames on the ground containing the blaze. But he almost as quickly retreats off stage. At this point, the dragon is now a pillar of flame, burning from its horns down to its feet. Two firefighters now appear behind the dragon by the cabin, which is the building that serves as the backdrop for the performance. They each have an industrial fire extinguisher and work to prevent the fire from spreading beyond the stage, which clearly has a containment area. Announcements come on the PA informing guests to leave the area, but guests leave slowly, most with their cell phones raised, trying to film the event. Some of them later claim that they could feel the heat all the way over in Frontierland. Under these circumstances, the crowd's stubborn retreat is actually far better than an anxious retreat that injures people. By this point, the Anaheim Fire Department has sent multiple units to the park, though their arrival will take many minutes. Also, the park is still full of guests. Operations shut down attractions in New Orleans Square and Critter Country, though Galaxy's Edge remained open. When the wind shifted a few minutes later, smoke collected around Black Spire Outpost, which one guest described as appearing like thick black fog. At the end of the night, 6 cast members were treated for smoke inhalation, though none were hospitalized. Also, after the park closed and firefighters finished their job, the dragon animatronic was nothing but a charred metal skeleton. A crew overnight tried to lower the figure down into the show pit, bringing it fully off stage, but the neck and head wouldn't fully collapse down into the dragon's body. In the morning, as guests arrived, the charred neck and head of the dragon could still be seen resting above the show pit, an ominous reminder of the previous night's blaze. That day, a green scrim was set up to hide the remains of Murphy resting beneath it. It would take days to fully disassemble the dragon and remove it from the visible parts of the island. As the cause of the fire was investigated, Disney temporarily suspended fire effects at other parks, particularly those with similar flame projection systems as used in Fantasmic. This is customary until a cause is identified and until a company can be sure that similar effects are safe elsewhere. The dragon in Disney World's Fantasmic continued to breathe a small ball of fire in each show, but this was an entirely different and less spectacular effect than the one used in California. Initially, the resort announced that Fantasmic was suspended at least until May 14th. That was later extended until at least May 28th. For a while, the entire island was closed to guests, but after some new fencing was erected around the stage area, the island was reopened. The show does have a B mode, where the dragon only appears on water screens, and when the show does return, this no doubt will be the version used at Disneyland for a while, until a replacement for that amazing but unpredictable dragon is arranged. So between this week's episode and the one last week, you are now entirely up to date with news for the Disney company, including the fire incident in Fantasmic. If you have some free time, go back and watch a couple of videos of the dragon mishap and see if you can now spot moment by moment how that event unfolds. Disney hasn't released much information yet other than that they are investigating it, but it will be interesting to see what they find once that investigation is done. As always, I'll be back next week with a new episode. Right now, I'm thinking that next week we'll look at a key attraction designed by Rolly Crump, but never built, an attraction that personally haunted Walt Disney. As you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions. On Bandcamp, you can find over 200 episodes not available on iTunes, but the best reason to join is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can become a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.